The call came at 1:17 a.m., slicing through the thick, humid Louisiana night like a shard of glass. For Detective Marcus Thorne of the Feliciana Parish Sheriff's Office, sleep was a luxury he rarely afforded and never trusted. The dispatcher's voice was flat, devoid of urgency. "Got a possible OD, detective. 14B Cypress Creek Lane, female, late 20s, patrols on scene." An overdose. In this forgotten pocket of St. Francisville, that was as common as the mosquitoes that swarmed under the sputtering streetlights. But something in that practiced calm, that routine dismissal, put Thorne on edge. It felt too simple, too neat. He guided his unmarked sedan through the dark, winding roads, past ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss that looked like grieving phantoms in the moonlight. Cypress Creek Lane was a dead end of peeling paint and broken dreams. Two sheriff's department cruisers were parked haphazardly, their flashing lights bathing a dilapidated clapboard house in strobes of red and blue. Thorne saw Deputies Miller and Russo, both white, both young, both radiating an impatient energy, loitering near the freshly strung yellow tape. "Evening, Thorne," Miller said, the words riding on the tail end of a barely masked yawn. "Waste of a trip. Looks like she partied a little too hard. Found some pills, no note. Open and Thorne offered a curt nod, ignoring the casual dismissal. He'd been a black detective in this department for 15 years, long enough to learn the unspoken codes. He knew that some cases and some victims were deemed less worthy of a full investigation, destined to become quickly closed statistics. He pulled on a pair of latex gloves, the sharp snap echoing in the unnatural quiet that had fallen over the scene. The air inside the house was a suffocating cocktail of stale cigarette smoke, the cloying sweetness of cheap floral air freshener, and the faint, coppery scent of death. The living room was small, but it was tidy to a fault. A threadbare couch was perfectly aligned with a scarred coffee table, upon which a stack of magazines was fanned out just so. This wasn't the scene of a chaotic overdose. This was the scene of a life trying desperately to maintain order against an encroaching tide of chaos. He found her on the floor of the bedroom, Lena Washington, 29, according to the corrections officer ID on the nightstand. She was lying on her back, her dark, intelligent eyes open and fixed on the water-stained ceiling with a look of profound, final surprise. A half-empty bottle of prescription sleeping pills lay on the nightstand, but the cap was screwed on tight. Everything was too neat. "You bag her, Hands?" Thorne asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the deputy's chatter outside. Russo scoffed from the doorway. "For an OD? Come on, Marcus. We've got 3 other calls waiting." Thorne knelt, his gaze sweeping over the body with practiced precision. Lena was wearing simple gray sweatpants and a clean white t-shirt. He saw them then, faint, almost invisible petechial hemorrhages in her eyes, tiny red dots that screamed of asphyxiation. His eyes traveled to her neck. Under the harsh, unforgiving glare of his flashlight, he could just make out the ghost of bruising, a faint, mottled discoloration that someone in a hurry, someone who had already decided what the story was, would easily miss. This wasn't an overdose. This was murder. The scene was a study in jarring contrasts. The deputies saw a messy, tragic end. A black woman, a prison guard, probably mixed up in something she shouldn't have been. Just another statistic to be filed away. But Thorne saw the opposite. He saw the meticulously folded laundry in an open drawer, the single framed photo of a smiling older woman on the wall, the worn copy of a James Baldwin novel on her bedside table. This wasn't the home of someone who would carelessly end their own life. This was the home of a fighter, someone clinging to dignity amidst the decay. The silence of the room was a lie. It screamed of a violent, desperate struggle that had been carefully erased. As the forensics team, summoned by Thorne over the deputies' grumbling protests, began their methodical work, he made one more pass around the victim. Her left hand was open, relaxed in death, but her right hand was clenched into a tight, defiant fist. Gently, using a pair of sterile tweezers from his kit, he pried her cold, stiff fingers open. Something small and dark fell onto the worn carpet with a soft, almost inaudible click. It wasn't a pill or a piece of... It was small, wooden, and intricately carved. A St. Jude pendant, the patron saint of lost causes. It felt strangely warm, as if it had been clutched with the last ounce of her fading strength. It was a symbol of faith and desperation, and it didn't belong to the simple, unadorned woman lying on the floor. It belonged to her killer. The next morning, the Louisiana sun did little to burn away the chill that had settled deep in Thorne's bones. He sat across from Chloe Jenkins in a sterile interview room at the station. As Lena Washington's best friend and fellow corrections officer, Chloe was a portrait of carefully constructed grief. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembled as she clutched a paper cup of water, but her uniform was immaculate, her composure absolute. "I just can't believe it," she whispered, her voice cracking on cue, a sound perfected for the occasion. Lena, she was so strong, but she'd been different lately. Distant. Distant. It was the word everyone used for a victim they didn't really know, a convenient label for a complex life. But Chloe offered a specific, tantalizing detail. She was seeing someone, secretly. She wouldn't tell me who. Said it was complicated. I think he was hurting her. A secret, abusive lover. It was the oldest, most common motive in the book, a perfect, simple explanation for a messy death. And Thorne didn't buy it for a second. It felt too scripted, too easy, a narrative handed to him on a silver platter. He drove out to the Feliciana Correctional Center later that day. The prison rose from the flat, green landscape like a concrete cancer. Barbed wire glinted cruelly in the sun, and the guard towers stood like silent, judgmental sentinels, watching over a kingdom of despair. The air here was different from the rest of the parish, heavy with regret, fear, and a simmering, institutionalized rage that seeped into the very soil. Warden Carmichael's office was an oasis of polished mahogany and quiet, air-conditioned authority, a stark contrast to the chaos he presided over. Carmichael was a relic from another era, a portly white man with a neatly trimmed silver mustache and pale blue eyes that assessed everyone and everything for their potential to cause him problems. "A terrible tragedy, Detective," Carmichael said, his voice as smooth as aged whiskey. He steepled his fingers on the expansive desk, a gesture of performative concern. Lena Washington was a fine officer, quiet, efficient, kept to herself. Her friend said she'd been distant. "Stressed," Thorne prodded, watching the warden's face for a flicker of something real beneath the polished veneer. "Any problems here at work?" Carmichael leaned back, the expensive leather of his chair groaning in protest. "Detective Thorne," he began, his tone shifting subtly from concerned to condescending. "This is a high-stress environment, especially for a woman like Lena. It's not uncommon for my officers to have personal issues that spill over. I trust you won't let this unfortunate domestic situation disrupt the delicate balance of my institution." The subtext was as thick and suffocating as the swamp air outside. "This is a black woman's problem, a messy love affair. Don't you, another black man, dare bring that mess inside my walls. Don't stir the pot." Thorne felt the familiar, hot prickle of anger at the base of his neck, a sensation he had learned to control but never extinguish. "Warden, a member of your staff was murdered. The balance of your institution was disrupted the moment her killer walked free. I'll need access to her locker, shift logs for the last 6 months, and I'll be interviewing her colleagues." Carmichael's eyes hardened for a fraction of a second before the mask of civility slipped back into place. "Of course. We'll cooperate fully. Just be careful what you go digging for, Detective. Sometimes you find things you can't unfind." The contrast between the two men was a chasm. Carmichael, in his climate-controlled bubble, represented the polished, sanitized face of power, a system that prioritized its own reputation above the lives of those it employed. He was the calm, undisturbed surface of a stagnant pond. Thorne, in his slightly rumpled suit that never quite lost the Louisiana humidity, was the stone thrown into that pond. He represented the inconvenient, messy truth that lay beneath. One man sought to contain the narrative, to file Lena's death away in a neat, dismissible box labeled domestic. The other was determined to shatter that box, no matter how much the content stank or who they implicated. The warden's warning wasn't just about the case. It was a reminder of the established order, an order Thorne had spent his entire career pushing against. The interviews at Feliciana were a study in futility. The corrections officers, a clannish and insular group, closed ranks, forming a wall of practiced silence. They offered the same sterile platitudes, a chorus of non-answers designed to shield their world from the prying eyes of an outsider. Lena was quiet, kept to herself, a real professional. The racial lines were invisible but palpable. The white officers were guarded and dismissive, their answers clipped, while the black officers seemed afraid, their eyes darting away from Thorne's, refusing to engage. Just as Thorne was about to give up for the day, a whisper came from an old, weary black janitor named Earl, a man who had seen decades of secrets get scrubbed from the prison floors, cornered him by a noisy utility closet. "You're looking in the wrong places, detective," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the grimy linoleum. She wasn't distant. She was curious. Too damn curious about things that weren't her business, about shipments that came in after dark. Shipments. The word hung in the humid air, electric with possibility. This was no longer just about a secret lover. This was about something happening inside the prison walls, something people were willing to kill to protect. Thorne retreated to his office, the janitor's words echoing in his mind. He felt like he was navigating a maze in the dark, with the walls closing in. He spread the preliminary crime scene photos across his desk, the images mocking him with their staged neatness. The tidy room, the neatly capped pill bottle, the St. Jude pendant. It all felt like a carefully crafted play, designed to mislead him, to send him down the easy path of a crime of passion. His phone buzzed, dragging him from his thoughts. It was the coroner's office, Doc Jensen on the line. "Marcus, it's Doc. Got the prelim tox screen and autopsy report on your CO. You sitting down? Just give it to me, Doc." "Okay, first, your hunch was dead on. Cause of death was manual strangulation. The pills in her system were therapeutic, not toxic. She took them regularly." Jensen paused, and Thorne could hear, "Your victim, Lena Washington, was approximately 6 weeks pregnant." Thorne felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. A baby. It changed everything. It added a layer of tragedy so profound it was almost unbearable, transforming the case from a simple homicide into the theft of 2 lives. "And Marcus," Jensen added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "that's not even the kicker. The sleeping pills weren't the only thing in her system. We found traces of emtricitabine and tenofovir. You know what those are?" Thorne's mind raced, sifting through case files and medical reports from his past. The names were clinical, but their implication was visceral. They're antiretroviral drugs. "Bingo," Jensen confirmed. "Commonly used as PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, or as a treatment for someone who is HIV positive." The sterile black and white facts of the autopsy report collided with the vibrant, complicated life they described, creating a polarizing, heartbreaking image. A pregnancy, the ultimate symbol of hope and a future, was now inextricably linked with the specter of HIV, a virus synonymous with fear and, in many minds, a death sentence. Lena wasn't just a guard, a victim, or a secret lover. She was a mother-to-be, navigating a terrifying health crisis in secret while pregnant with a child. The case had just exploded. It was no longer a simple triangle of love and jealousy. It was a complex, terrifying web of secrets, fear, and life-and-death decisions, all taking place under the shadow of a deeply corrupt institution. Thorne looked at her official department photo again. The quiet determination in her eyes, which he had first mistaken for shyness, now looked like raw, desperate courage. The quiet, professional woman described by her colleagues was a phantom. The real Lena Washington was a warrior, fighting battles on multiple terrifying fronts, and she had been fighting them all alone. The air in the interrogation room was thick with the unsaid, heavy with the smell of disinfectant and old fear. Across the scarred metal table sat Damian D. Cross, inmate their 73451, serving 15 to life for armed robbery. He was lean and powerfully built, with intelligent eyes that had seen too much but hadn't lost their sharpness. He carried himself with a quiet, coiled confidence that was rare inside Feliciana's walls. According to the prison grapevine and a quick check of medical files, he was also HIV positive. "I don't know nothing about Officer Washington," Damian said, his voice a low, steady baritone that betrayed no emotion. He met Thorne's gaze without flinching. She was tough, but fair. That's all. Thorne let the silence stretch, a tactic he'd used 1,000 times. Then he dropped the first bomb. She was taking antiretroviral drugs, Damien. The kind a person takes when they've been exposed to HIV. He watched for a reaction, a flicker, a tell, but Damien's face was a mask of stone. So Thorne dropped the second. She was also 6 weeks pregnant. That broke him. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. Damien's eyes widened, a raw, wounded agony flooding his face, replacing the convict's cool defiance. He slumped forward as if struck, his shackled hands clenching into white-knuckled. Pregnant? He choked out, the word a ragged whisper of disbelief and horror. No, she would have told me. The confession, when it came, wasn't a trickle. It was a flood. The carefully constructed walls of the tough, untouchable convict crumbled, revealing a man consumed by a love he couldn't protect and a grief he couldn't process. It wasn't just a fling, detective, Damien said, his voice thick with unshed tears. I loved her, and she loved me. He told a story that seemed impossible within the concrete confines of Feliciana. A story of notes passed in library books, of fleeting stolen glances across the noisy chow hall, of conversations whispered through a food slot in the dead of night. But it was more than a love story. It was a secret alliance. Lena didn't just see an inmate, Damien explained, his eyes burning with a new fierce intensity. She saw an innocent man. She believed me. According to Damien, his armed robbery conviction was a setup, orchestrated by a rival gang with connections to dirty cops on the outside. Lena, with her sharp mind and an unshakable sense of justice that was dangerously out of place in Feliciana, had started digging into his case on her own time. She was uncovering evidence, finding inconsistencies, getting close to finding the proof that could free him. Then he found out, Damien spat, his face twisting with a pure, unadulterated hate. He who? Thorne pressed, leaning forward. Carmichael. The warden's name sounded like a curse on his lips. About a month ago, he called me into his office. No, he knew about us. I don't know how, but he knew everything. He showed me a picture of us, just talking too close by the laundry. He didn't threaten me, he threatened her. Damien's story painted a chilling picture of calculated cruelty. Carmichael hadn't cared about the breach of protocol. He'd seen an opportunity, a lever to be pulled. He used the affair as a weapon. He told Damien that if Lena didn't stop her extracurricular investigation into his case, he would not only fire her, but would leak the story of a black female guard sleeping with an HIV-positive inmate to the local press. He would destroy her life, her reputation, and her future, and make it look like he was simply doing his duty. But she wouldn't stop, Damien said, a terrible mix of pride and terror in his voice. She was scared, but she was stubborn. She told me she was digging into something else, too. Something bigger. Something to do with Carmichael himself. Those shipments the janitor told you about. Drugs, phones, money. A whole damn smuggling ring he was running right under everyone's noses. She said if she could expose him, it would blow my case wide open and we could be free. Both of us. The bleak gray interrogation room had become the stage for a story of vibrant, defiant hope. The love between out fell a cheap, disposable burner phone, a thick leather-bound journal, and a tiny black USB flash drive, no bigger than his thumbnail. The moment was a stark juxtaposition of old-world detective work and cutting-edge technology. The primal, infallible instinct of an animal had led them to a treasure trove of digital secrets. The dusty, forgotten space beneath the floorboards, a hiding spot as old as time itself, held the key to a modern conspiracy of data, corruption, and murder. Shadow sat back on his haunches, panting lightly, a living, breathing tool of justice, indifferent to the human drama swirling around him. He had simply followed the scent. For Thorne, however, the scent was of truth, and it was stronger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. He was holding Lena's last will and testament, her final, desperate gamble to expose the darkness that had ultimately consumed her. Back in the sterile, fluorescent-lit environment of the Sheriff's Department forensics lab, Lena Washington's secrets began to bleed onto the screen. The burner phone was a gold mine, a digital chronicle of a forbidden love filled with hushed, frantic texts between her and Damien. They were planning, hoping, fearing, and dreaming of a life that had been violently stolen from them. The USB drive was the bombshell. It contained meticulously organized spreadsheets, damning photos taken with a spy pen, and scanned documents. A methodical, irrefutable indictment of Warden Carmichael's smuggling empire. It detailed drug shipments, money laundering schemes, and, most importantly, a list of guards on his payroll. But it was the journal that made Thorne's blood run cold. The leather-bound book felt heavy in his hands, a tangible piece of Lena's fading life, filled with her elegant, measured script. He expected to read about her love for Damien, her fear of Carmichael, and he did. But as he turned to the final entries, written in a shaky, hurried hand in the days leading up to her death, a new name appeared. It was a name that didn't fit, a name that twisted the entire investigation into a horrifying new shape and made the betrayal feel suffocatingly personal. The early pages detailed her investigation into Damien's case, her growing certainty of his innocence, and the blossoming of their impossible love. "He sees me," she had written, "not Officer Washington, not just another black woman trying to survive in a man's world. He sees Lena." Then the tone shifted. Fear began to creep into the margins, a palpable sense of being watched. "Carmichael knows. I saw it in his eyes today. He smiled at me, but it was like a shark smiling. He knows about Day and me. He's going to use it. I have to be faster. I have to get the proof before he can destroy me." She documented the existence of the USB drive, the burner phone, her hiding spot under the floorboards. She was smart, methodical, even in her terror. But it was the last two entries that stopped Thorne's heart and reframed everything he thought he knew. Entry from the Tuesday before her death. "Chloe is asking too many questions. She keeps telling me to be careful, to stop. She says she's worried about me, but it feels different. It feels like she's watching me. She saw me with the USB drive yesterday when I thought she'd already left for her shift. She asked what it was. I lied, said it was just music. She didn't believe me. The way she looked at me, it wasn't concern. It was something else, something cold." Thorne's mind reeled. Chloe Jenkins, the grieving best friend, the one who had so helpfully painted the picture of a secret, abusive lover. It had been a lie, a deliberate, calculated misdirection. Then he read the final, horrifying entry, written on the very day she was killed. "Chloe knows about the baby. I don't know how. I haven't told a soul. She cornered me in the locker room. She said I was throwing my life away for him, for a criminal, for—" she said the word, "a carrier." The hate in her voice was terrifying. She said Carmichael would protect me, that he was a good man, that I should trust him and give him whatever I had. She knows about the drive. I'm sure of it now. I'm scared. I think she's going to tell Carmichael to protect me or to protect herself. I can't tell which is worse. The entire narrative had been a carefully constructed facade, and Chloe Jenkins was its architect. She wasn't the grieving friend. She was a potential conspirator, a snake in the grass. The warmth and sisterly love she had performed so convincingly in the interview room now seemed grotesque, a mask for something cold, calculating, and predatory. The powerful image of two best friends, two black women navigating a hostile, racist, and sexist environment together, shattered into a million pieces. It was replaced by a far more terrifying picture. One woman desperately fighting for justice and love, and the other, her closest confidant, her sister in arms, possibly working to betray her to the very man she was trying to expose. The enemy wasn't just the overt, corrupt power of Warden Carmichael. It was the insidious, smiling betrayal of a trusted friend. The St. Jude pendant Thorne had found suddenly took on a new, sickening meaning. Who else would have given Lena a religious token but her closest friend? A friend who had now become the prime suspect in her murder. A cold dread settled in Thorne's gut. He had to tread carefully. Accusing a decorated corrections officer, the victim's supposed best friend, based on a dead woman's diary entry, was a risky, potentially career-ending move. He needed more. He needed to break Chloe Jenkins, and to do that, he had to dismantle the fortress she had built around herself. He found her at her home, a small, immaculately kept apartment that mirrored the obsessive order of Lena's own house. When she saw him at the door, a flicker of genuine fear crossed her face before being replaced by the now familiar mask of practiced sorrow. "Detective Thorne, is there news?" "I have a few more questions, Ms. Jenkins," Thorne said, his voice level and devoid of warmth. He stepped inside, his large frame seeming to shrink the small living room. Lena kept a journal. Chloe's composure cracked instantly. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like flawless, shocked alarm. A journal? Oh, God. What did it say? Was it about the man she was seeing, the one who hurt her? She was doubling down on her lie, desperately trying to steer him back onto the false trail she had so carefully laid. "It said she was afraid of you, Chloe," Thorne stated, his gaze unwavering, watching her every micro-expression. The color drained from her face. "Me? That's insane." "She wasn't well, Detective. You have to understand. She was paranoid. The stress of the job, her whole situation. It was getting to her. She was pushing everyone away, even me." She began to cry, but this time the tears seemed real, hot with a potent mixture of indignation and rising fear. "Where were you on the night of Tuesday the 14th? Thorne asked, pressing his advantage. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Where was I?" she asked, her voice dripping with scorn. "I was at the St. Francisville Community Church for the all-night prayer vigil from 7 p.m. until the next morning. You can ask Pastor Michael. You can ask the 50 other people who were there. I was praying for my friend's soul while someone was taking her life. It was the perfect alibi, ironclad, a church full of witnesses. Any other cop might have backed off, apologized for the intrusion, and walked away. But Thorne had learned long ago, through bitter experience, that the most perfect stories often have the most significant flaws. He spent the rest of the day at the church. Pastor Michael confirmed Chloe's story with solemn sincerity. Yes, she was there, distraught over her friend, a pillar of support for the community. Thorne interviewed a dozen other parishioners, all of them white-haired and well-meaning. All of them said the same thing. Chloe was there, all night. He was about to leave, the dead end feeling like a physical weight on his shoulders, when he saw an elderly woman meticulously sweeping the church steps. Mrs. Dubois. She'd been a fixture in the parish for 60 years, a woman who missed nothing. He approached her, showing his badge. "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm investigating the death of Lena Washington. I was told her friend Chloe Jenkins was here at the vigil all night." Mrs. Dubois leaned on her broom, her ancient brow furrowed in concentration. "Chloe, such a sweet girl. Yes, she was here, crying her eyes out. Poor thing." She paused, tapping a wrinkled finger against her chin, her mind sifting through the events of the evening. "All night, you say? No, dear. That's not quite right." Thorne's pulse quickened, a jolt of adrenaline cutting through his fatigue. "What do you mean, ma'am?" "Well," she said, her voice a reedy whisper that carried the weight of decades of observation. "She left for a little while, around 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock. Said she had a family emergency she had to take care of, something urgent with her mother. She was gone for, at least an hour and a half. Came back looking even worse than when she left, pale as a sheet. I remember thinking to myself, that poor child is carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders." The hallowed, peaceful sanctuary of the church was transformed from a symbol of Chloe's innocence into the cornerstone of her deception. The community that had provided her with a perfect alibi was now, through the sharp memory of one elderly woman, the instrument of its destruction. The image of Chloe, the devout, grieving friend praying amongst the faithful, was grotesquely superimposed over the image of Chloe, the liar, slipping out into the darkness to commit an unimaginable act before returning to hide her sin amongst the righteous. Her alibi wasn't just broken, it was obscene. She had used God's house as a cover story for murder. The weight of the world Mrs. Dubois saw on Chloe's shoulders wasn't grief, it was guilt. The crack in Chloe's alibi was the hairline fracture Thorne needed to shatter her entire story. It was time to unleash the full, crushing force of the evidence he'd been holding back, to see if the pressure would make her confess or fight back. He returned to the forensics unit, his mind racing with possibilities, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a terrible, final clarity. "I need everything you can pull from that burner phone and the USB," he told the lead technician, a young, sharp-eyed man named Dave. Specifically, I need geolocation data for the burner phone on the night of the murder, and run the financials on that USB against a list of all Feliciana Corrections personnel. Cross-reference everything. What came back wasn't a trickle of information. It was an avalanche that buried Chloe Jenkins in a mountain of deceit. The list of guards on Warden Carmichael's payroll was extensive, a sickening testament to the depth of his corruption. And near the top of that list, with regular significant payments going into a secondary bank account she had opened 6 months prior, was a name that made Thorne's jaw tighten. Chloe Jenkins. She wasn't just a friend caught in the crossfire or a woman who made a single terrible mistake. She was a player, an active paid participant in the very criminal enterprise Lena was trying to expose. Her motive was no longer just a twisted, obsessive love. It was cold, hard self-preservation. Lena wasn't just a romantic rival for a man Chloe despised. She was a direct threat to Chloe's freedom and her illicit income. The tech scrolled through a spreadsheet on his monitor, the columns of numbers telling a story of escalating greed. The payments started about a year ago. Small at first, a few hundred here and there. Then they escalated. Looks like she was one of Carmichael's key people on the inside, helping to facilitate the movement of contraband and keeping an eye on other staff. This changed the entire dynamic of their friendship. Chloe hadn't been trying to talk sense into Lena out of love. She'd been trying to shut down a fellow conspirator's investigation out of fear. Every word of warning, every expression of concern had been a lie designed to protect herself. Then came the final damning piece of digital evidence, the technological nail in her coffin. Got the tower data from the burner phone, the tech announced, pointing to a map of the parish on his screen. Lena received one final text on the night she was killed. It said, "Need to talk. Meet me at my place. Urgent." The message was designed to look like it came from Damien, using the same slang and private phrases we found in their other messages. But it wasn't sent from inside Feliciana. He zoomed in on the map. The signal from the phone that sent the message didn't originate from the prison. It pinged off a cell tower whose coverage area was a tight 3-mile radius. A radius that happened to include a small dilapidated house on Cypress Creek Lane, and at its very center, casting its shadow over the entire area, was St. The web had collapsed. Thorne now had Chloe on Carmichael's payroll, a shattered alibi witnessed by a pillar of the community, and a digital footprint placing her at the heart of the conspiracy and the murder itself. He could see the sequence of events with chilling, gut-wrenching clarity. Chloe, learning of Lena's investigation and then her pregnancy, panics. She uses her intimate knowledge of Lena and Damien's secret communication to lure Lena into a fatal meeting. She slips out of the prayer vigil under the guise of a family emergency, drives the short distance to Lena's house, and confronts her. When Lena refuses to back down, when she refuses to abandon her quest for justice, the confrontation turns violent. The cold, hard data on the screen painted a picture of absolute, breathtaking betrayal. The neat columns of numbers and the red dot of a cell tower location were the modern-day equivalent of a bloody fingerprint. They were irrefutable, impartial, and utterly damning. The image of Chloe as a grieving friend was now completely obliterated, replaced by the portrait of a cold, calculating criminal. She was a spider who had helped weave a web of corruption, and then, when her own position was threatened by the one person she claimed to love, she had poisoned her. The love, the friendship, the shared struggle, it was all a lie, a convenient cover for greed and a desperate fear of being exposed. The two women, once seen as sisters in arms against a corrupt system, were now cast in the ultimate polarizing roles, the martyr and the betrayer. Thorne felt no triumph, only a profound, soul-deep weariness. He had found the truth, and it was uglier than he could have ever imagined. The air in the interrogation room was heavy and cold, recycled and stale. This time, there were no paper cups of water, no gentle inquiries, no pretense of a friendly chat. Chloe Jenkins sat at the metal table, her lawyer beside her, a prim, severe man who looked deeply out of his depth, like he'd been called in for a traffic violation and had stumbled into a capital murder case. Chloe's face was a mask of defiant terror, her eyes darting between Thorne and her counsel. Thorne didn't enter like a storm. He moved with a quiet, deliberate calm that was far more unnerving. He didn't sit down immediately. He stood at the head of the table, placing a series of thick files down with methodical precision. A folder containing bank statements, a map with a stark red circle drawn on it, a printed log of text messages. He didn't accuse her of murder. He didn't mention the journal or the shattered alibi. He began with a completely different line of attack, one she couldn't possibly have prepared for. "We need to discuss your financial arrangements with Warden Carmichael, Ms. Jenkins." The lawyer started to object on grounds of relevance, but Chloe silenced him with a sharp, terrified look. Her eyes were locked on Thorne, wide with a dawning, panicked understanding. He wasn't just investigating a murder. He knew everything. The foundation of her world was cracking beneath her feet. "For the past 12 months, Thorne continued, his voice a low, even monotone that filled the small room, "an account in your name has received regular electronic deposits from a shell corporation owned by the warden. The total comes to just over $50,000. In exchange, our evidence shows you facilitated the entry of contraband into Feliciana and provided information on other staff members. That's conspiracy, racketeering, and a host of federal charges. You're looking at a decade in prison, Ms. Jenkins, minimum." He let that sink in, let the weight of the words press down on her. He wasn't attacking her as a killer, but as a common criminal. He was dismantling her defenses brick by brick, starting with the foundation of her lies, the greed that had set everything in motion. "That's absurd," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. I would never." Thorne ignored her denial and slid the cell tower map across the table. On the night Lena Washington was murdered, a text message was sent to her burner phone, luring her to a meeting. It was sent from a phone that pinged this tower. "Your church, Ms. Jenkins, is less than 100 yards away from the transmitter. You told us you were there all night, but we have a witness who says you left for an hour and a half to handle a family emergency." What was the emergency, Chloe? Was it that your partner in crime, the woman you were supposed to be watching for Carmichael, was about to blow the lid off your entire operation? Her composure finally shattered. The mask of the grieving friend, the indignant suspect, it all melted away, revealing the raw, terrified face of a cornered animal. Her lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, trying to get her to stop talking, but she wasn't listening. Her world was collapsing in real time, the walls of her deception caving in on her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head frantically from side to side. "No, no, you don't understand." Thorne leaned forward, his large frame casting a shadow over her. His voice dropped, becoming almost intimate, a scalpel designed to cut to the bone. "Oh, I think I do. She was going to expose Carmichael, and you along with him, but it was more than that, wasn't it? She was pregnant, with his child, a man you despised, a man you saw as a disease. She was building a future that didn't have you in it. You weren't just losing your freedom or your money, Chloe. You were losing her. That was the key, the final turn of the screw. He had stripped away the layers of greed and conspiracy, leaving only the raw, obsessive beating heart of the matter. A choked guttural sob ripped from Chloe's throat. It was a sound of pure, primal agony. "I did it for her!" she screamed, slamming her cuffed fists on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small, silent room. "I did it all to protect her, to save her from herself." The interrogation room, a place of cold, hard facts and legal procedure, became an arena of explosive, raw emotion. Thorne, the calm, methodical agent of justice, stood in stark contrast to the unraveling, hysterical Chloe. Her scream was not the sound of innocence wronged. It was the desperate, selfish cry of a predator caught in a trap of her own making. Her confession of motive, "I did it for her," was the ultimate grotesque perversion of love. It was the language of the abuser, the controller, the stalker. In that moment, she ceased to be a suspect and became a monster, one who cloaked her obsessive, possessive rage in the guise of protection. The line between love and hate, friendship and ownership, had been irrevocably, violently crossed. The dam had broken. With her lawyer looking on in stunned, useless silence, Chloe Jenkins began to talk. The story poured out of her in a torrent of tears, rage, and a twisted, chilling self-pity. The truth, when it was finally laid bare, was more pathetic and more terrifying than Thorne could have imagined. "I loved her," Chloe began, her voice a raw whisper, her eyes fixed on a point on the cinderblock wall, a place far away in a past only she could see. "Since we were kids on the playground, she was everything I wasn't. Brave, bright, unafraid of the world. I would have done anything for her. I did everything for her." Her involvement with Carmichael hadn't started with simple greed, she claimed. It started with a warped, toxic sense of provision, an attempt to make herself indispensable. She was always struggling with money, Chloe explained, her voice taking on a note of righteous justification. "Carmichael offered me a way to help her, to give her things she deserved. A little extra cash here and there so she wouldn't have to worry. I told her it was from my savings. I just wanted to make her life easier. I was taking care of her, don't you see?" It was a narrative of obsession, nurtured over years of unrequited, unspoken love that had curdled into a possessive need. Chloe saw herself not as a friend, but as Lena's protector, her secret guardian, the only one who truly knew what was best for her. When Lena fell for Damien, Chloe saw it not as love, but as a sickness, a contamination. "He was a stain," she spat, the venom returning to her voice, her face contorting with disgust. "A criminal, a disease. He was pulling her down into the filth with him, and she was too blind with love to see it. I tried to warn her, to make her see sense, but she called me jealous. She said I didn't understand." The pregnancy was the final, unforgivable betrayal. It wasn't just a secret. It was a monument to a future that Chloe was explicitly excluded from. It was tangible, living proof that Lena was building a life, a family, that had no place for her. "When she told me she was going to expose Carmichael, I knew it was over," Chloe continued, her voice flat now, devoid of emotion, as if recalling a story about someone else. "She would have taken us all down, herself included. I had to stop her. I had to save her." She described slipping out of the church, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a terrible, righteous purpose. She used a spare burner phone she kept for her dealings with Carmichael to send the text, perfectly mimicking the tone and language she knew Lena would associate with Damien. When she arrived at the house, Lena was waiting, anxious but hopeful, thinking she was about to see the man she loved. "I begged her," Chloe said, looking at Thorne for the first time since her outburst, her eyes pleading for an understanding he could never give. "I told her I would take care of her and the baby. We could run away, use the money I'd saved, and start over, just the two of us. I told her I loved her, that I'd always loved her." According to Chloe, Lena had looked at her not with anger, but with a profound, heartbreaking pity. "She laughed," Chloe choked out, a fresh wave of tears streaming down her face as she relived the final rejection. She said, "Oh, Chloe, it's not your fault you can't understand." She touched my cheek and said I needed to let her go. That single act of kindness, of gentle dismissal, was what broke her. The pity was more insulting than any anger could have been. "I just wanted her to stop looking at me like that," she whispered. "I grabbed her, to shake her, to make her see. We were yelling. She pushed me. And I put my hands on her neck. I just wanted her to be quiet. I just wanted her to stop pitying me." She described the brief, desperate struggle, the life fading from her friend's wide, surprised eyes. When it was over, there was only a profound, ringing silence. "I took the pendant from her neck," Chloe confessed, her voice barely audible. "The St. Jude. I'd given it to her for her birthday years ago, for lost causes. I put it in her hand. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted a piece of me to be with her. Maybe I wanted someone to find it and know who was really there in the end." The entire sordid story was a monstrous perversion of love. Every act Chloe had described as protective was, in reality, an act of control. Every gift was a chain. Every word of concern was a warning. The final violent act was not a moment of passion, but the ultimate expression of her possessive obsession. If she couldn't have Lena, no one could. The image of her placing the pendant, a symbol of their friendship, a gift of supposed love, into the cooling hand of the woman she had just murdered, was the ultimate act of psychological horror. It was an attempt to rewrite the narrative even in death, to frame their twisted, broken bond as something sacred. In that cold, quiet interrogation room, the line between saint and sinner, lover and killer, was not just blurred, it was erased by the hands of the one who claimed to be both. The fallout from Chloe Jenkins' chilling confession was swift and seismic. Armed with her detailed testimony and the irrefutable evidence from Lena's USB drive, federal agents descended on Feliciana Correctional Center like a righteous storm. Warden Carmichael and a dozen of his guards were arrested in a series of quiet, pre-dawn raids, their corrupt empire crumbling to dust under the weight of one woman's courage. The media frenzy was intense, a whirlwind of cameras and headlines. But for once, the story wasn't about a fallen prison guard caught in a sordid affair. It was about a hero, a whistleblower who had paid the ultimate price to expose a deep-seated rot that had festered for years in the Louisiana heat. Damian Cross's case was officially reopened. With the evidence of police and institutional corruption that Lena had meticulously gathered, his original conviction was overturned within months. The bars that had held him for a decade finally slid open. Weeks later, Detective Marcus Thorne stood at the back of a small, crowded cemetery, the air thick with the scent of freshly turned earth and wilting flowers. He watched as Lena Washington was laid to rest. He saw her mother, her face a mask of quiet, unendurable grief. He saw a few solemn-faced colleagues from the prison, the ones who hadn't been implicated, their faces a mixture of sorrow and shock. And then he saw a familiar figure standing under a nearby oak tree, flanked by two plainclothed guards. Damian Cross granted a supervised release to attend the funeral of the woman who had saved him. As the mourners began to disperse, their quiet sobs carried away on the humid breeze, Thorne approached Damian. The man's face was etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have aged him a decade, but his eyes, for the first time, held the light of a free man. "I'm sorry for your loss," Thorne said, the words feeling small and inadequate in the face of such a monumental tragedy. Damian nodded, his gaze fixed on the casket being lowered into the ground. "She believed in justice, Detective, in a place where no one else did. She thought she could fix a broken world." He finally looked at Thorne, his eyes clear and direct. "They're naming the new state anti-corruption bill after her, the Lena Washington Act. Her name will mean something." "It always meant something," Thorne replied quietly. They stood in silence for a moment, two men from opposite sides of the law, a detective and an exoneree, united by their profound respect for the woman who had brought them together. "What she did for me," Damian began, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer had to hide. "She gave me my life back, and I couldn't save hers." "You didn't have to," Thorne said, the truth of it settling in his own mind. "She saved her own. Her legacy isn't her death. It's the truth she uncovered, and the truth, once it's out, is forever." As the guards led Damian away, back to a world he would soon re-enter as a free man, Thorne remained by the grave. He thought about the complex, tragic web he had untangled, a story of systemic corruption, of casual racism, and of the quiet, desperate bravery of one woman who he thought of Chloe, now destined to spend her life behind bars, a prisoner of her own suffocating obsession. He thought of the child that would never be born, a tiny, innocent ghost in a story full of them. The cemetery was a place of endings, but here, under the warm Louisiana sun, it also felt like a beginning. The stark white headstones stood as monuments to lives lived, contrasting with the vibrant, green grass that symbolized life's stubborn, relentless persistence. Lena's story was a tragedy, born of a dark, possessive obsession that had masqueraded as love, but her legacy was one of light. The ultimate lesson of the case settled upon Thorne with the weight of hard-earned wisdom. It wasn't a lesson about the nature of evil, which was often depressingly simple and selfish. It was a lesson about the true nature of love. Chloe's love was a cage, demanding, controlling, and ultimately destructive. It sought to own. Lena and Damian's love, born in the most hopeless of places, was about freedom. It sought to liberate. True love doesn't seek to possess. It seeks to empower. It doesn't build walls to keep someone in. It tears them down to set someone free. Thorne straightened his tie, turned his back on the grave, and walked toward his car. The case was closed, but the work, he knew, was far from over.